do solemnly swear and affirm
do solemnly swear and affirm
that I will faithfully and impartially
that I
that I will faithfully and impartially
discharge and perform all duties
discharge and perform all duties
incumbent on me as school committee member
incumbent on me as school committee member
according to the best of my abilities and understanding,
according to the best of my ability and understanding,
agreeably
agreeably
to the rules and regulations
to the rules and regulations
of the Constitution
of the Constitution
and the laws of this Commonwealth.
and the laws of
this
this
Commonwealth.
Commonwealth.
So help me God.
So help me God.
And that's it. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
Thanks.
Happy to
Thank-
have all of you here with me. Thank you for doing that. I appreciate it.
Thank you for addressing us as long-standing, not old.
Especially since you're sitting down.
All right, so I'm going to let the rest of everybody else in.
Yep, sounds good.
Holy mackerel.
A lot of people.
85,
81.
81.
Hey, we've had 100 and something, so.
Jeez.
Is everybody in, Greg? That,
Few more.
okay.
And he says, after quarantine, maybe we will reading together. And I already listened.
Is my list in there?
No, this is right here.
Where's mine?
Hey, Eric, you might want to mute yourself. Sydney would be a good addition to the committee.
Yeah.
Okay, shall we begin? It is 7:02, and I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the Central Berkshire Regional School District School Committee meeting on December 3rd at 7:03. Welcome, everybody, and let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. I do have a flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United
States
of America and to the republic
for which it
for which
stands,
it stands,
nation,
one
one
nation, under God,
under God,
with liberty
with liberty
and justice for all.
all.
Thank you. Superintendent Blake Davis, would you take the roll call, please?
Yes, Mr. Alpert? Mr. Alpert?
Unmute yourself, Art. Oh, there you go.
Here.
Mr. Bartels?
Here.
Mr. Case?
Here.
Mr. DeFazio?
Here.
Misty Tomaso?
Here.
Dr. Eberwein?
Here.
Mr. Emerson?
Here.
Dr. Jelinas?
Here.
Mr. Locatell?
Here.
Ms. Latazori?
Here.
Ms. Lounsbury?
Here.
Mr. Peters?
Here.
Mr. Stewart?
Here.
Mrs. Tucker?
Here.
Dr. Kraft Reese?
Here. Thank you. And I'm going to validate the agenda, and we will begin with reorganization. Nominations for the chair of the school committee.
I'd like to nominate Dr. Barbara Kraft Reese for chair.
Second.
Second.
That. Second.
Okay. That was fast. Are there any other nominations, please? Okay, seeing none, we'll take a vote. And Greg, how are we doing this vote?
So normally we would do ballot vote, but since
Right.
we are in Zoom, we're just going to do a roll call vote. So first, we're going to do a roll call of the nomination, and then we have to do a roll call for the actual chair. So
Okay,
you're voting on the nomination.
okay, that's the first.
Mr. Alpert?
Yes.
Mr. Bartels?
Yes.
Mr. Case?
Yes.
Mr. DeFazio?
Yes.
Misty Tomaso?
Yes.
Dr. Eberwein?
Yes.
Mr. Emerson?
Yes.
Dr. Jelinas?
Yes.
Mr. Locatell?
Yes.
Ms. Latazori?
Yes.
Ms. Lounsbury?
Yes.
Mr. Peters?
Yes.
Mr. Stewart?
Yes.
Mrs. Tucker?
Yes.
Dr. Kraft Reese?
Yes. And now we're voting.
So since there is no other nomination, I would suggest we move on to the vice chair, because if there's no other one for vice chair, we could just do the whole reorganization as one vote.
Okay, before we go on though, I would like to make a statement.
Oh, please do, yeah.
Okay, so I kind of anticipated that this was going to happen. So I wrote something that I'd like to share with you, and I really thank you for your trust and your confidence in me. Although I haven't been in this community as long as many of you, in a relatively short time, I've come to recognize Central Berkshire as an outstanding school district. Our superintendent has a clear vision in terms of how best to provide equitable and inclusive learning opportunities for all of our students. She leads a team of administrators who are dedicated and insightful, and teachers and staff who demonstrate their willingness to embrace new strategies to benefit their learners. Having worked as a teacher and a principal for 40+ years, I am more than capable of recognizing excellence, and I see it here in Central Berkshire. As the chair of the school committee and one who is passionate about public education, I promise to always lead as an advocate for our children, families, and faculty. While there will be difficult discussions and decisions ahead of us, I promise to face these with compassion and understanding. And it's my expectation that we all will as members of the school committee. We may disagree from time to time, but must remember that we model the behaviors that we seek from our community. Now that we are potentially in many living rooms across the district due to Zoom, it's even more important that we model respect. Our children deserve that, and all of us as members deserve that too. So let's be what we want our children to learn, rather than what we don't want them to learn. Again, I feel honored to assume this role as we continue to move forward in these very challenging times. By working together, I believe we have what it takes to problem solve and make the best decisions for our students, staff, and families. I'm very proud to represent Central Berkshire as the school committee chair. Thank you. Okay, so now we'll move on. Greg will do the vice.
So do we have any nominations for vice chair?
Okay.
I would like to nominate Mike Case as vice chair.
Okay, we have a nomination from Mike Case. Any seconds? Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a second. Are there any other nominations?
Nominate Mr. Peters.
Do we have a
Second.
second? Okay, we have a second. Okay, so now we'll have to do a roll call vote, correct, Greg?
So first we have to vote on the nominations. So,
Okay,
so vote on nominations, then I'll think about how we're going to move forward.
okay then. Leslie,
Mr. Alpert. Mr. Alpert,
Oh, yes.
Mr. Bartels,
Could I have clarification? Are we voting on both nominations?
Both nominations.
Okay,
yes.
yes, then.
Mr. Case,
Can I make this easy and like I abdicate to Rich Peters?
Okay.
Can I do that?
So,
I think once we get through the voting on the nominations, then you can, and then, so we'll vote on the nominations first, and then you can
withdraw.
make a statement.
Then I'll say yes.
Right.
Okay,
Mr. DeFazio,
Yes.
Ms. Di Tomaso,
Yes.
Dr. Eberwein,
Yes.
Mr. Emerson,
Yes.
Dr. Jelinas,
Yes.
Mr. Luckatell,
Yes.
Ms. Latazori,
Yes.
Ms. Lounsbury,
Yes.
Mr. Peters,
Yes.
Mr. Stewart,
Yes.
Mrs. Tucker,
Yes.
Dr. Kraft Reese.
yes. And now we have two nominations going forward. We have Mr. Peters and Mr. Case. Mr. Case, did you want to say something?
Yeah, although I'm very flattered and stuff. I've been very impressed with Rich Peters and the job that he's done. So why would I want to rain on his parade?
Okay, thank you. So we have Mr. Peters. And now we have to vote on that.
Rich, did you want to say anything, or?
I didn't prepare a speech, no, but thank you, Mike. And, I'm also honored to serve. And I thank Barbara for doing another year, for sure.
Thanks, Rich. Okay,
So I think we just need a motion just to set, for Rich Peters as chair,
Vice Chair.
Vice Chair.
as vice chair, excuse me.
Vice Chair.
So moved.
okay, we need a motion for Mr. Peters.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a second. Now we need a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Alpert,
Yes.
Mr. Bartels,
Yes.
Mr. Case,
Yes, and thank you, Bonnie.
Mr. DeFazio,
Yes.
Ms. Di Tomaso,
Yes.
Dr. Eberwein,
Yes.
Mr. Emerson,
Yes.
Dr. Jelinas,
Yes.
Mr. Luckatell,
Yes.
Ms. Latazori,
Yes.
Ms. Lounsbury,
Yes.
Mr. Peters,
Yes.
Mr. Stewart,
Yes.
Mrs. Tucker,
Yes.
Dr. Kraft Reese.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Peters. I look forward to working together with you again this year. Okay, the appointment of district secretary. Would
So
you like to
what-
do those?
So actually what I would do now is similar to what we do with the warrants, kind of read through all of them. If there's any questions, answer any questions, but then do one roll call vote for the whole reorganization.
Okay. Are you ready for that, Mr. Peters?
Sure. So we have a be it resolved for the appointment of district secretary, be it resolved that Leslie Blake Davis be appointed district secretary through November 2021.
Second.
Okay. Also, appointment of legal counsels for the district. Be it resolved that Murphy, Hess, Toomey, and Lahane LLP be appointed special education legal counsel for the Central Berkshire Regional School District from December 1st, 2020 through November 30th, 2021.
Second.
Appointment of the physician for the district. Be it resolved that Dr. John Dallenbach be appointed physician for Central Berkshire Regional School District from December 1st, 2020 to November 30th, 2021.
Second.
We have a second. Mr. Peters, there's one that the district treasurer. Did you read that one?
Oh,
And I missed
Sorry,
it?
I missed it. I jumped out my mouth too far.
Okay.
Okay, district treasurer, be it resolved that Richard Jett be appointed district treasurer through November 2021.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on all of these appointments. Any discussion? Seeing none, we need a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Albert,
Yes.
Mr. Bartels,
Yes.
Mr. Case,
Yes.
Mr. DeFazio,
Yes.
Misty Tomaso,
Yes.
Dr. Eberwein,
Yes.
Mr. Emerson,
Yes.
Dr. Jelinas,
Yes.
Mr. Locatell,
Yes.
Ms. Latazori,
Yes.
Ms. Lounsbury,
Yes.
Mr. Peters,
Yes.
Mr. Stewart,
Yes.
Mrs. Tucker,
Yes.
Dr. Kraft Reese.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much. We have those appointments. Subcommittee preferences. I've received some, but not all. So before I can make the assignments, I would appreciate your submitting your choices. So if you haven't done so, please do so. Okay, we're going to change the order later on, but right now we'll do responses from the audience. And I know there were two people who contacted me who wanted to speak, so I will recognize John Murphy first.
Hi, thank you. I'm sure you can all hear me. I don't see myself, which is fine. Season's greetings. Start my video. Okay, thank you. Season's greetings. I want to preface my brief comments by saying that I'm fully aware of the kind of gravity of decisions that you folks have been having to make the last, better part of a year now. That is not lost on me. I don't imagine that you pictured having to make decisions of quite this magnitude possibly ever when you signed on to this. So I appreciate the work that you've all done and continue to do. I also want to thank Mike Hogue and Laura Miller for the work that they do behind the scenes, for which they get not a whole heck of a lot of credit. I also want to say that, I just want to talk about two things very quickly. One is patience. I understand that there's not any student or administrator or teacher or parent certainly that is happy that we're in the spot that we're in. We're in a situation of which we have minimal control, whether that's in school or not. And I just wanted to point out that what I'm going to talk about here, I'd rather not be talking about, but I would like to realistically talk about the situation that we're in really briefly. I feel like we're at a spot here where there is at least the concrete hope of a light at the end of the tunnel. Vaccines are being spoken of with much more confidence than they were previously. I also think, though, that that's a while off. And the reason I mention patience is I think that we may just simply have to be patient for a while longer and stay the course that we're on, is my thought on that. Just purely for safety's sake, I have seen some numbers in certainly the community numbers from the last couple of days. They certainly don't look to be getting better. I'm sure Dr. Doyle will speak much more professionally and accurately to that in a bit. The other thing I want to put a plug in for is continuity. The students I've spoken to, and I have a lot of students that I've spoken to on Zoom the past couple of weeks, have really been overt in their hope that a decision of some kind will be arrived at, just so for planning purposes, and these are just students I'm talking about, this is without talking about teachers or administrators or parents, And I finally just want to say that it would be, I think, advisable to, and instead of risking that we begin to go back and forth, this is the third time already that we've been in remote since last March, that I would just, humbly suggest that we continue on a course, and this happens to be remote that we're in now, that we can stay on a course that we can stick with and tell the students and the parents this X, Y, or Z is what we will be doing for a little while here. Whether folks decide that that's hybrid or remote, which I think is probably the safer bet, but something that we can go to the students and the families and say, this is what we're going to be doing for a little while. You can plan your lives and your schedules around this plan, whatever that may be. I want to thank Dr. Kraft Reese for the time. I want to wish you all good luck making what I think is a very difficult decision, and I will yield the floor. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. You raised some really interesting points, and we are having tough decisions to make. Okay, the next person who contacted me was Mr. Ryan. Is he here?
Yes, hi.
Okay. Okay.
I don't have video going right now, which is okay. You can hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Oh, there I am.
There
Hi,
you
everybody.
are.
Hi there. So I thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak on behalf of our family. My name is Pat Ryan. My wife Jess is here as well in the room. We wanted to address a concern with remote learning plan for students with special needs. As a vocational high school teacher and a parent of a child with special needs, I know firsthand the challenges and stressors these children have been dealt, and it's tough all the way around. With that said, we reach out to you as parents and members of the community to please consider a change in the remote plan. Our daughter is nonverbal with an extremely adaptive curriculum, and it is next to impossible for her progress in a positive way on the remote plan. She is limited and her education is suffering. Her teachers are doing everything they can to help move forward with it. It's just really frustrating for all of us to watch. She thrives in school and needs a lot of hands-on support on a daily basis. She has a full-time para who is extremely helpful and attentive to her needs. We cannot really assess any of these things in a helpful way while she is at home, and we are struggling to help our child just get through the day. Right now, our daughter is only able to access in-person learning 2 times a week and only 2.5 hours for 2 days. This is barely enough time for her to get her services. We are aware the school buildings are still accessible during the week. She is attending 2 half days a week right now, and she needs a lot more in-person learning. Lastly, and personally, and I say this for a lot of parents out there who have special needs children, I'm having a very hard time watching my wife become the full-time teacher on a daily basis with a high needs child. We obviously have our everyday struggles outside of school. School is what our daughter needs, and she needs to be there every day as long as we all feel safe. We ask for help and that you take this in consideration when making possible changes in the remote learning plan for these students, hopefully sooner than later. Thank you all for your time and listening to what I had to say tonight. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. I hear your concerns. I really do. Okay, we'll open it up to any other comments from the audience. And again, I can't see, so Greg, can you help me with this?
Alicia Corbett wanted to speak as well. So I'm
Alicia Corbett.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm really, it's a very much a struggle for all of us. I feel just now, it breaks my heart. It really does. It's not an easy time for any of us. So please understand from the point I'm coming from, it is not meant to intend to anybody. It's just to be, we all have the right to speak. But it's my right to speak and to voice my feelings as well. And we all have our own situations. We all do. But I asked to work from home remotely. I do teach makerspace classes. It's been challenging because it's all new for me, and I care about these kids, all kids. I do not work in the special ed department, and I'm being told to come in with a few other selected paras. I don't know these students' needs. I don't know these kids that I'm supposed to be there for. But the paras that do know these students are working home remotely. I have a daughter myself. It's just her and I. If something happens to me, my daughter has nobody. She has no grandparents, nobody either. It's important that all of our concerns need to be heard, and I get it from everybody. I really do. I am sensitive to everybody's needs because everybody's needs need to be met. But I don't feel comfortable being handpicked to be in the building. So I don't think that we should all be selected, or we should all be in the building. So it's either or. We all work in the building or we stay home remote to be safe. During these holidays, it hasn't changed. It's very scary. But I think we need to be mindful of that because everybody has their concerns. Everybody has their needs. And it's not easy for anybody. Everybody's going through their own time. But for expectations for us is that you need to make sure that all of us are in the building or not. I'm scared. I'm very nervous. And I've been very good about this, along with my daughter.
Thank you, Alicia.
But one other thing is
I appreciate that.
I do want to say something about our seniors. Our seniors are also not being recognized. Some of our seniors that get services through MRC, they have not been able to meet at all. And these kids are high needs as well because they need these services and they have not had them implemented. So, and they are graduating this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. Okay, are there other people who would like to speak? Nobody else, Greg?
Not seeing any, no.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate those responses, and I'm really grateful to hear different points of view. Now we have student affairs. Is Shane with us tonight? Shane or Faith? Okay, then we will move on. And what we are intending to do tonight is deal with the safety and wellness subcommittee first, and then we'll go back and fill in other parts of the agenda. So, given that, Nicole, would you like to report on safety and wellness?
Okay. Yes. So, hang on a sec. Let me just grab this. So yeah, we met on Monday, this past Monday, the 30th, to discuss some important issues. First of all, we heard from Dr. Doyle and Jane Smith, who both joined us again for countless meetings that they've been attending with us to help give us some direction and guidance. I believe Dr. Doyle's in the audience, and I was hoping that he wouldn't mind coming on at the beginning of this report just to kind of give us an overview of the current metrics and maybe speak about some new testing capabilities that are on the horizon.
Yep,
Oh,
I'm
thank
here and I can do that.
Awesome, thank you.
So we'll talk about the current status of COVID in the county, its impact on acute care, and challenges we've been facing in terms of the testing in the county, but with some remedies that are on the horizon. The latest report from the DPH came out around 5 o'clock this afternoon. Dalton had 20 cases over the past 2 weeks. Hinsdale had 3, Beckett had 3. That's a slight decrease in Dalton over the previous week's case count. When I talk with the public health nurses, Leslie Drager for Dalton, she's found that many of the cases she's seen over the past week are employees who work in long-term care facilities where they've contracted the disease, and there's always the risk of passing that on to their household members. Pittsfield continues to have a very high count. It was 350 cases in the past 2 weeks. Half of those related to one nursing home, and that's a similar pattern to what you see in Lenox, that also had a high case count. But again, they had a long-term care facility that had a cluster of cases. The impact it has on acute care so far is that currently there are 30 patients in the hospital at Berkshire Medical Center with a COVID diagnosis. Half of those have come from one of the nursing homes. But there has been an increase in the community and people being hospitalized. And that's the pattern that you see. Case counts go up, people become ill, and then disease runs its course, and some people have to be hospitalized. In terms of testing, one of the big frustrations we've had with contact tracing in the county is that it has taken far too long for us to get results back from the commercial lab that was doing the majority of the testing for the health system. People have been going to MedExpress where they can get an antigen test back quickly, but the confirmatory PCR test from there takes some time to come back as well. The health system's contracted with the Broad Institute out of MIT and Harvard University to start doing testing, and they'll start at the North Adams site tomorrow, and hopefully in Pittsfield next week. They'll have a 36-hour turnaround time on testing, so that'll help a lot in terms of identifying where the cases are and doing much more prompt contact tracing. The Central Berkshire system has signed on to do the pilot program for the Binax antigen test. And the state did their own validation study on that in Lawrence, the Lawrence General Hospital, and found it has very good results, particularly in terms of picking up the disease for people who are symptomatic, where it's just as good as a PCR test. And so I'm very hopeful that'll be helpful within the school district when we have the opportunity to use it. And the health system is also working on some additional antigen platforms that should be helpful in terms of improving testing. They have a limited supply of the Abbott ID Now PCR tests, which are being used for healthcare employees and also first responders who become symptomatic. So hopefully testing will improve, and that'll help with that turnaround time and case controls. As far as I know from talking to Leslie Drager, none of the individuals who were close contacts of students who had cases within the schools in Dalton or Central Berkshire developed COVID because of their exposures, which is also good news. And I'm sure you're all aware that the state and the CDC are shortening the time for ending quarantine and expediting quarantine termination by having a negative COVID test. And we'll see how that plays out over the next week or two. Anybody got any questions for me?
Great. Okay, thank you. Did any of our school committee members have any questions for Dr. Doyle while he's here?
I would just urge everybody to remember to be recognized by the chair before you ask questions, just to have an orderly meeting.
David Stewart is looking.
Hi, Dave. Go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Doyle, thank you. With the revised CDC guidelines, that's still a PCR test, not the rapid test. Is that correct?
All I know is what I've seen in the news, David, and what I read was that the CDC is stating you can have a test done between day 5 and 7, that either a PCR test or an antigen test, And if it's negative, you're off quarantine after 7 days. I don't know if the state of Massachusetts is going to buy into that. And this is a federal system, so the CDC gives an advisory, but the DPH sets the rules. So we'll
Thank you.
see what happens. The antigen testing is improving. The first couple of test platforms that came out had a particular problem with a high false positive rate. But the Binax platform and some of the other manufacturers are coming out with a much more reliable test platform. So it may be that they'll accept certain antigen tests at the state level, but not all of them. We'll see.
Thank you. Okay, Nicole.
All right, moving ahead. I just wanted to ask too if Jane Smith, if from the Dalton Department of Health, if you're on, if you had any comments to add. There's so many people on, I couldn't see if you were here.
Jane is here, yes.
There we go. Yes. Thank you. As Dr. Doyle talked about, you know, we're in a constantly shifting situation here. You know, we're understanding the virus more. We have different guidance. We have different tests. We have different turnaround times and different opportunities. And I think, you know, it just underscores that we're trying to do our best to stand on a solid foundation when there's sand shifting all the time underneath us. And my one thing that I'd like to say, I think that what I've dealt with the school board and the members here, the school nurses and the Board of Health, is that I feel like we're all pulling on the same rope. And that I think the most important thing is that we set ourselves up so that we can be adjustable to the extent possible to react to what the understanding is, while still creating a steady foundation for our kids, because I do think the consistency has been really, the lack of consistency just with the past 9 months has been hard on everyone, especially our kids. But you know, there's a lot of benefit to schools. There's a lot of, you know, tangible things that we actually can measure as far as protective factors that happen at school with adults, extra adults that really care for them and feeling valued by their community. And so, you know, it's just my hope that we can all continue to work together to create the best situation possible for us to get our kids where they need to be in the safest way possible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Jane. I appreciate your input. Okay, so just to report on a little bit more on the meeting that we had as a Safety and Wellness Committee committee on Monday. We also had an audience, and I just want to start by saying that we heard some of the same concerns that we heard at the beginning of this meeting, echoed in that we heard from an administrator and a school committee member who was not also part of the Safety and Wellness Committee who joined us, and the message was the same. Our number one priority, that everyone wants kids back in school. I mean, that's the ultimate goal. The question is safety. And right now we've switched from remote to hybrid, back to remote. And there's, I guess, they're asking us to consider being consistent and not toggling back and forth between learning modes. We heard from Leslie Blake Davis. She gave us a report on the Binax Now testing that is going to be taking place in the schools. And I think we're one of 3 districts in Berkshire County that has expressed interest and is moving forward with being able to do on-site testing. This is the rapid antigen testing that Dr. Doyle had talked about that has shown to be a little bit more accurate in recent weeks. I think this is a good step for our school, for our district. And I think we should give a lot of credit to our nurses and to Debbie White and Leslie for taking on this initiative, because I think once we do get the students back in the building, it will be a key factor in keeping our kids in the building and keeping track of the COVID cases. Leslie also kind of expressed to us the concerns that she's been hearing from a lot of teachers and staff, families to really consider keeping consistency with the models of learning, and not to be going back and forth between remote and hybrid are the two options right now. Looking ahead, you know, there's a lot of logistics in switching from one mode to the other. You know, you have to think about, you know, lunches and buses, and more importantly about teachers and their planning. And we need more than like a 1 or 2 day notice. So she was looking to see if we would consider setting a date, you know, in advance, so that there can be planning and efforts put into having a date set for a return to hybrid. So we had a lot of discussion around this. And we also heard from Debbie White, who told us that she has actually heard from a lot of families. Like she said, between the middle school and high school, that she's heard from about 100 students who are not comfortable coming back in the building, which is going to create a logistical problem, because we have to accommodate that. If people don't feel comfortable coming into the buildings, we can't expect that they will be. Unfortunately, the online platform that we have in place, which is called TECA, is not accepting new students until late January. So they have their students and they're running through their curriculum. So now what we would need to do is create, excuse me, a cohort C. And this would take some planning to do. Our teachers would need to be able to teach to both children in a hybrid setting and to students who are home in the cohort C, and they're fully remote. So there was a request that maybe we look at planning for a return to hybrid after the holidays. And after a lot of discussion, we set a target date of January 19th. This is the day after Martin Luther King Day. It's a Tuesday. The feeling was that that would give time for the effects of the holidays, the potential travel, large gatherings, parties, or even just seeing a few relatives. It would let all that kind of wane. At that point, we might have the testing aboard, and we'll have the new MOU adopted and in place, which will allow that once we are back in hybrid at that point, hopefully we can stay the course. So we can have some consistency with remote until that point, switch to a hybrid, have some other guidelines in place, have some supportive structures like the new MOU, which would allow some more flexibility, meaning that if one town goes into yellow, like Dalton did a couple weeks ago, that we don't have to close schools across the district automatically. You know, it'll give us some flexibility to keep most of the hybrid going. So we discussed it, and we thought that that was what we wanted to bring forward to the full committee tonight, was the recommendation to target January 19th for a return to hybrid learning. I didn't know if any other members of the Safety and Wellness Committee had anything to add to that.
I would just like to say that, first of all, I truly appreciate Nicole's work, and the fact that we have Dr. Doyle and Jane Smith present at all of our meetings is really a bonus that it's an unexpected bonus, and I thank them both tremendously. There is no one answer that's going to please everybody, and that's a given. I think that when we are talking about this, we have to really consider keeping the school, keeping the children and the faculty and staff safe. So that's what really prompted our decision, was just the idea of people needing to be safe, and that's our responsibility. Yes, it's to educate, but it's to educate in a safe environment. So for right now, when things are kind of in flux with the holidays, we'd like to be safe and consider the January 19th date for returning.
Okay.
Mr. Bartels.
I just have to agree, and thank you, Nicole, for what you've done. And I'm looking at consistency. If we flop back and forth from hybrid to remote, and in this time of the holidays, and seeing what the trends are going to be after the gatherings and after families are together or whatever it may be, I don't want to see a flip-flop. I think that that's very important to be consistent in that respect. I feel that the January 19th target date is appropriate, and we'll have a better idea on how things are going to go at that point in time. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Dr. Jelinas.
Yes. I understand why we'd want to have that much time, but that looks like 6 more weeks of fully remote. Is that correct? Is that what we're looking at? 6 more weeks?
Well, the holidays are in between.
There's going to be for break, but yeah, it's about that time. Barbara, should I make the motion and then have the discussion?
I think so.
Okay.
I'm also going to just share my screen so everybody else can see it as well.
Thanks, Greg.
Was there anybody else who wanted to add to Nicole the safety and wellness before we make a motion?
Well, is this for discussion? I thought I still had it.
No, I was asking if anybody else from the Safety and Wellness Committee had anything else to say, and then we'll go to the motion and then to discussion.
Okay, thank you.
So anybody else from Safety and Wellness want to speak?
I will. I just want to concur with what you and Nicole and Mr. Bartels have said. The consistency is of utmost importance, that it's not just flipping back to, you can't just flip back to hybrid like you're flipping a switch. It takes a little bit of planning. So considering that teachers would probably want at least part of next week to plan, then you're looking at 2 weeks, a week and a half of hybrid prior to Christmas break, which isn't a lot of consistency between modes and could be challenging to the students. And I know that we are looking at a new place for our testing to go to get our results quicker. But right now, the testing is for PCR tests is 7 to 10 days. So anybody who's gone to get a test today may not get their results back for a week and a half. That doesn't, as a parent, that doesn't lend a lot of, I'm very concerned with the contact tracing at that point, because if you have somebody who's sick, spread, and then all the people they've been in contact with still out and about for a week and a half, asymptomatic people can be spreading that. And we're coming into the holidays, and it's just, it's not worth it to me at this point.
Okay, Nicole, thank you. If there's nobody else from the Safety and Wellness Committee that would like to speak, then we can move on to the motion.
Okay. So I'll read the motion. Be it resolved that the Central Berkshire Regional School Committee approve the Central Berkshire Regional school district to remain in remote learning through the holidays with a return date to hybrid learning of January 19th, 2021, in accordance with the COVID-19 Memorandum of Understanding as recommended by the Safety and Wellness Subcommittee.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second. Thank you very much. And now we can open it up to the floor for discussion. Dr. Jelinas.
Okay, I did, thank you very much. I have a question. At this point, how many in our schools are affected? Because you said there are 20 people in Dalton, 3 in Hinsdale, 3 in Beckett. How many are in the schools?
Dr. Kraft-Reese, I can respond to that if you.
Yes, I recognize you. Thank you.
Yes, so Dr. Julius, right now, one of the challenges right now is that, and Debbie, our assistant superintendent, and I were having this discussion, because we're in remote, I think it's probably possible that there could be some cases that I'm not aware of, only because without being physically present, students or individuals within the school system wouldn't be considered a close contact. But prior to going into remote, we had identified there were 4 individuals that had been tested positive at Wacona. There was 1 at Nessicus, there was 1 at Kittredge, and there were 4 at Craneville.
Okay, thank you. Now my second thing is, I agree with everything, and I know safety is a feature, and I am also concerned about the holidays, but I think waiting till the 19th, if we could come back a week before that, say January 11th, that's 1 more week of hybrid learning that the kids would get. And I think that would still give us 2 weeks after the December break, where I would like to get back sooner rather than later. So I would like to say January 11th rather than the 19th.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments? I can't see.
Yeah, I have my hand up, Jacob Rowan.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Is everybody okay with that?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, was that Dr. Everwine? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just want to be recognized.
Yes. You're
my question is primarily directed back at the health professionals, Dr. Doyle, and there's been some discussion about risk to kids, and we're weighing obviously the risk of being in school versus the risk of having them out of school. I'm just curious about your position, as a public health professional, and in terms of weighing that and where you stand.
Dr. Doyle, are you still here? There you
Yeah,
are.
I'm here. So the risk to kids is lower than it is for older age groups, but it's not 0. The real risk with kids is they're going to bring it home and give it to older adults, especially their grandparents. All right, that's the concern you have. The risk around COVID is not transmission within the school; it's bringing it home and passing it around in the community. That's where the real risk lies for this.
So is your
You have to
position
balance
then-
that risk against the fact that the educational experience, no matter how hard you try with remote learning, is not the same as having children in the classroom. From a social, educational, or development standpoint, I'm not an education professional, but everybody knows that. I think that it makes sense to me not to go back and forth with the mode of learning. I think Dr. Jelinas has a good point about going back on January the 11th. I do think that if you go back into the classroom, that memorandum of understanding that you currently have needs to be different. You need to follow the DESE guidelines. And there is a great hesitancy, I think, within school districts to abide by those guidelines issued by DESE, not just in Central Berkshire, but throughout Berkshire County so far.
So is this pretty consistent across the county that you're in effect advocating for schools to go remote?
I'm not advocating for that.
All right, so I'm just looking for an opinion.
My opinion is that at the present time, I think you're stuck in remote until after the holidays.
Okay.
But when you go back, you should go back with guidelines that I think are a bit more rigorous than what led you to close the schools in Beckett and Hinsdale, which I think could easily be open right now and be open with a reasonable amount of safety. So you need to have a different way of making your decisions. These were made without involvement of the Board of Health. I was CC'd on a letter from Northern Berkshire Pediatrics just before this meeting, sent to the school districts in Northern Berkshire County talking about their concerns regarding movement to remote learning and the impact they see it having on the children in their practice.
Thank you.
And I think that's that's a sort of an unappreciated long-term cost of these decisions that we're making about the modus of learning.
Okay.
Thank
But I
you,
mean,
Dr. Flynn.
and I'm not looking for to have a debate with you here, but the risk to kids is in effect 0 or close to it. It's really the transmission to adults, right?
That's what I said.
Because when 100 kids are telling a principal that they're not comfortable going back to school, they should be fully comfortable. They don't really have any health risk with this particular thing. They probably have more risk being out of school.
I agree. The risk is where they bring it. I mean, there are rare cases reported of inflammatory type syndrome affecting children, but that's almost at a reportable level because it happens so rarely.
Mm-hmm.
The risk is that children can be asymptomatic transmitters, which is why ideally you'd have surveillance testing that could help with this whole pandemic, but we don't have that in place at the present time.
Okay, thank you. I see Mr. Peters. Yes, Mr. Peters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question about the testing, Leslie, that we were going to be getting. And if I understand it right, we have to be in school to get that testing going. The other question I have is, and this is to Dr. Doyle and to the testing that we're going to get. I'm assuming that we'll be testing all the kids, and that that would make our decision easier to stay in school. Is that correct assessment?
Dr. Kraft-Reese, can I speak?
Absolutely. Thank you.
So the Binax Now testing, actually, it can be used to make sure we are bringing students back. So it can be used as sort of to make sure we can be in remote, but we can say it's going to help us get students back into school, which it will. So we're fine right now on the path that we're on to receive the Binax Now testing or the test kits. And, in terms of the timing of the test, I think as soon as all of our paperwork, our necessary paperwork has been filed. So I'm just waiting for a couple things. We could get it, hopefully we could get it before the December break, or potentially not until after the holiday break, but it will be soon. It shouldn't draw out. In order that there's some very specific guidance in terms of how those tests are used. So they're really intended to be used. They can be used for students and they can be used for staff. They're really intended to be used for students and, like I said, potentially staff that are in school and are symptomatic. They're not intended to be used as a screening tool. So again, we get a certain supply of them. So like I said, they're intended to be used. And I'm just really, what I'm quoting to you is just from the guidance that I read from the program. Now it's possible that, the nurses went through, yesterday was a full day professional development day for Central Berkshire staff. Yesterday, the nurses completed the modules. So I'm sure it's also possible that there's something that came through that I'm not as aware of. But we also discussed as that our nursing professionals will have some discretion around using them because they are professionals, and that's, we have to do that. But so that's just a couple of things around, the parameters of using those test kits.
Thank you. Are there, Mr. Stewart, I'm recognizing you, and then Mr. Lacatell.
Thank you, Barbara. Dr. Doyle, do I understand correctly that that there's a reasonable level of safety if we bring the kids back, say on the 11th of January, that it may not be necessary to wait the full 2 weeks, especially if we have the testing in place?
I don't think anybody can predict the future, but it's probably not going to be that big of a difference between the 11th and the 19th.
And Leslie, do we know when we'll have all that testing in place?
Dr. Krefries, can I speak?
Absolutely.
So I would say that I would say definitely by then. I mean, I was hoping to have it, I'm hoping to have it before the holidays. I'm hoping to, you know, definitely, like I said, we're laying the foundation right now. We can be ready. We can be ready. I mean, we can be ready in a couple of weeks. So we're not looking at a huge delay. I mean, we should have the capacity for that within early July. There's a particular form that we're waiting for, and maybe Dr. Doyle is a form that we're waiting for, which is called the CLIA certificate, and that has been filed with the Mass Department of Public Health. So that's the only that's something that we're waiting on, and then we also file a standing order with our consulting pediatrician, Dr. Dallenbach, and I know that won't be a delay for us. So really, those, once we receive both of those, the facilitator from the state and I send those in, we're only looking at a few days before we receive our kits, or they're mailed pretty quickly. So it isn't a long delay.
Thank you, Leslie. With
Dr.
that information,
can I make a comment
to the motion to amend the date to the 11th?
We're going to continue our discussion before we do that. So Mr. Lacatell, thank you though, Mr. Stewart. Mr. Lacatell, you wanted to speak.
Yeah, there's just a couple of things. Certainly Nicole did an excellent job of summarizing all the advantages and disadvantages, and I was the one who spoke up in favor of continuity or consistency. I just looked at my calendar, and I'm not very good at this, but I think we're talking about 5 weeks if we go to the 19th. And as I recall, the reason the 19th was chosen was that we'd be off on the 18th because of Martin Luther King Day anyway. So that just, if we were to do it on the 11th, it'd be one more difference in the way that we're operating. That's why I would favor the 19th. I wouldn't favor this at all, except that we've got the holidays that are coming up that are breaking up the continuity no matter what we do. But the other factor is if you can't turn on TV without hearing an expert on COVID, and they're all saying we're looking at a surge on a surge. And so I expect if we're going to try and predict the future, that's the best prediction we can make. And the 19th gives it more time to play out, although I don't understand the timeline as well as Dr. Doyle does, I'm sure. But if we might be rushing it on the 11th, and if we were to schedule it for the 11th and find out we had to delay until the 19th, that would be ridiculous. I think we have a better chance of adhering to the plan if we plan for the 19th.
Thank you, Mr. Lacatell. Yes, Ms. Slounsbury.
I kind of want to piggyback off of what Mr. Lacatell had just said about not possibly having time to reassess after the holidays. If we're coming back after the 1st of January, I was just looking at the committee meetings calendars, and it looks like there's nothing from the 14th of December until the 14th of January. So it does make me wonder if the 11th would be cutting it real close for making decisions for us to help keep continuity for the children.
Thank you very much. Are there any other school committee members who would like to speak to this? Yes, Mrs. Tomaso.
So I just want to clarify, and regarding the TECA course, did I understand correctly that people who want to enroll in that no one can enroll after, I thought you said it was mid-January. Is that correct? That the TECA enrollment is locked out until mid-January?
Superintendent Davis.
Thank you. So Ms. DiTomaso, this is our online learning management system. It goes by semester, so one semester ends at the end of January. So I think there was some flexibility, but it didn't seem to really make sense to enroll a student with only like 3 weeks or 4 to 6 weeks left in the semester. So I think for the most part, you know, what that's done is there are families that truly, you know, just sort of speaking to what Dr. Doyle said, where, you know, the concern is that children could bring it home, not so much transmission within the school setting. For those families that have significant concerns, serious significant concerns, and this was on, you know, this was a recommendation from the state, that we offer this platform for them so that they don't, you know, and it's usually most of those families that have contacted us have someone in their household that's immune compromised, or it's the student themselves. So it's not really recommended that you would switch a learning platform when there's only 4 to 6 weeks left in that learning platform. We have had some families, one of the challenges is we've had some families that have been very successful with our remote learning, and they do have some fears, and they have come to us and they've said to us, you know, could they continue in remote, as you know, even once we return to hybrid. And unfortunately, the difficult part of that is that, you know, that's a pretty it's a heavy lift for teachers, because you're really asking them to teach to our students that are fully remote as well as our students that are in person. So in general, we have to distinguish between the two. So that's just a challenge that we've had, and I think that was the challenge that was brought up at Safety and Wellness, because, you know, I think there's no replacement for in-person learning, and we want to get these students back to school. And I would just reiterate what everyone else is saying, but we definitely need the consistency, and that's why we've worked so hard as a team to bring this by next now testing. We want to be able to get back into in-person, and we want to stay there. That's just, you know, that's my feeling about this. But we do have a group of families that will just ask us if they can continue in remote with their CBRSD teachers, and that's something that we really can't offer right now. So that's just been a challenge, is coaching families through that.
The reason I asked that is because I didn't know if there was a tie-in to the projected date of January 19th and the remote learning system semester end. That's why I asked that question. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. I understand that Mike Case and Debbie White would like to ask a question, and I saw Ellen also. So we'll start with Mike.
Hi. My problem is I'm leaning toward the 11th. I think we should start back in school on the 11th. And if you think about it, the Christmas break or the winter break, whatever you want to call it, the family get-together is around the 25th. So you're adding almost a month after the big group that may get together this year for the spread. And I lean toward what Dr. Doyle said. The sooner we get our kids back into school, the better. And you know, I just feel 11th is a more suitable date.
Thank you. Debbie White.
Thanks, Barbara. I just wanted to, acknowledge that this is a really difficult decision, and I think the vast majority of us understand both sides of the issue here. I did want to just add that at Nessicus, we actually are having a higher rate of attendance in remote than we did in the hybrid. And a lot of that was due to, although I did not have a case at Nessicus until after we were closed, there were some kids on a bus that had to be quarantined because of close contact with high school students. And if a kid has any sort of symptoms, they're home as well. So we currently have above 95% of attendance on a daily basis in remote. So I've been really happy with that. And I know the teachers have been doing a lot of work following up with parents, and the office is calling if a kid is missing first period. And but I'm really pleased with that piece of it. The other thing I wanted to mention was the point that Mr. Ryan made. We do have some students that are high needs, and they do need to be in more in-person learning, and we are working on that with the MOU to increase both the frequency and the duration of their time during remote so that we can better meet their needs. So that is also in process, but I just wanted to make those 2 points.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Ladazori.
Thank you, Dr. Kraft-Reese. I want to advocate for the 19th. I think we're forgetting that the winter break goes through New Year's, and it may not be for the elementary school students, but for the high school students who may be having New Year's get-togethers. We saw what happened at Wacona when we had, some people get together for a party. It took out a whole cohort. So if you consider New Year's as a get-together period, and we know that small gatherings are spreading this more than schools are, which is the thought and some of the science behind it, that you're going to see people get together for New Year's. They're going to spread it at New Year's possibly. It takes a few days to develop symptoms or to get tested. If you're contact traced, then you're looking at, 7 to 10 days after that. I still think that it's more prudent to wait the full 2 weeks after winter break to see how the whole winter break peters out, not just Christmas.
Thank you. Mr. DeFazio, did you have your hand up?
I did, but what I was going to say was covered.
Thank you. Mr. Bartels?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not downplaying the safety of the students, but I haven't heard a lot about the safety of the staff. I mean, if it can be spread by the children or the students to adults outside of the school, what about to the staff? If we don't have staff, we can't teach the students. And with this surge that's taking place now and what they're predicting into January and February, I think we also have to look at staff and their safety. And again, think about the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bartels. I agree with that. If we don't have teachers to teach, then we can't have school. Are there any other school committee members who would like to ask questions during this discussion of the motion? Yes, Dr. Jelinas.
Just responding to to Ellen's comment. If you looked at the calendar, the 11th is 11 days after New Year's Eve. So any parties, you still have that 10-day window if we came back the 11th. And I know, and I was thinking of Mr. Ryan and other parents that I've talked to, the sooner we can get the kids in, the better. So even 1 week sooner, I think if we could do that, I think that would be helpful. Thank you.
Dr. Jelinas, yes, the first New Year's Eve.
I'm going to recognize you, okay?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Go
Dr.
ahead.
Jelinas, yes, I know just New Year's Eve and New Year's are still, within the 10 days. But if you've come in contact with somebody on New Year's who's COVID positive, you can't get tested. You're not supposed to get tested for 4 to 5 days after that. So the spread on New Year's is going to extend to 4 to 5 days after New Year's. Then it's another 7 to 10 days on top of that. So I still, which brings us to the 2 weeks.
Okay. Anybody else from school committee who has anything to say? So we do have a motion on the floor. And the motion was, again, Greg took it away, but it was to remain in remote until January 19th. That's the essence of it. Here we go. So again, the motion is, be it resolved that the Central Berkshire Regional School Committee approves the Central Berkshire Regional School District to remain in remote learning through the holidays with a return date to hybrid learning on January 19th, 2021, in accordance with the COVID-19 Memorandum of Understanding as recommended by the Safety and Wellness Subcommittee. So that was the recommendation from the subcommittee. We've had a motion, we've had a second, we've had discussion. I think we need a roll call vote on this.
Point of order, Madam Chair. Mr. Stewart here. Point of order. I laid an amendment to the motion out on the table. And that hasn't been called for a second. We've continued to have discussion on the main motion after the amendment was raised.
Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead. Mr. Stewart's motion was the same as ours, except for coming back on the 11th. Is that correct?
That would be the amendment to the motion, yes.
Okay, so that's the amendment to the motion. Here we go. Do we have a second?
Yes.
That was Mr. Case. Okay. So any discussion about the amendment to the motion?
May I speak?
Yes.
Thank you. So I think we've already had a lot of discussion on the 19th, on the 11th. It seems as though with the testing that's out there, the revised CDC guidelines, even though it hasn't been adopted by DPH, the guidance sort of seems that we don't need the full 14 days, especially with the testing. And again, to Mr. Ryan's concerns about more time for remote. I think it's a concern for all of us. I know hybrid is a little bit more work for the teachers, and it's probably double the work, if not more. But I really think that we could safely bring these kids back on the 11th, and that's why I made the amendment for that.
Thank you. I think that the teachers personally are working as hard as they can on remote and hybrid, and it's not that they're going to be working twice as hard. They're working diligently on both. That's just my 2 cents. Yes, Mrs. Tucker.
I just wanted to add a couple comments. I know that we decided as a subcommittee on the 19th, and there's a lot of good rationale as to why the 11th might be a viable date as well. My vote will be to stick to the 19th because that's what we discussed in our Safety and Wellness Committee meeting. But I do think in the matter of 1 week, hopefully it won't make too much of a difference. And that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we're ready for votes. So, Mr. Bono, Greg, do we do the main motion first? And
No,
then,
so we're going to vote on the amendment.
okay, so here we go. We'll do a roll call for the amendment, the amended one. Mr. Stewart's.
Mr. Albert,
No.
Mr. Bartels,
No.
Mr. Case,
Yes.
Mr. DeFazio,
No.
Ms. DiTomaso,
You're muted.
Muted.
You're muted.
Ms. DiTomaso,
Yes.
Dr. Eberwein,
Yes.
Mr. Emerson,
No.
Dr. Jelinas,
Yes.
Mr. Locatell,
No.
Ms. Latazori,
No.
Ms. Lounsbury,
No.
Mr. Peters,
Yes.
Mr. Stewart,
Yes.
Mrs. Tucker,
No.
Dr. Kraft Reese.
No. So we have 6 yeses and 8 noes, am I right?
I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 yes, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 no.
Okay, so that does not pass. Now we'll go to the other motion, and that was for the 19th, same wording. So Dr. Superintendent Blake Davis,
Mr. Alpert,
Yes.
Mr. Bartels,
Yes.
Mr. Case,
No.
Mr. DeFazio,
Yes.
Misty Tomaso,
No.
Dr. Eberwein,
No.
Mr. Emerson,
Yes.
Dr. Jelinas,
No.
Mr. Locatell,
Yes.
Ms. Latazori,
Yes.
Ms. Lounsbury,
Yes.
Mr. Peters,
Yes.
Mr. Stewart,
No.
Mrs. Tucker,
Yes.
Dr. Kraft Reese.
yes. So the motion carries. Thank you very much for these difficult decisions and great discussions and very respectful. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. So now we're going to go back to, let's see where we were. Okay, secretary's report.
Dr.
I'm
Christie,
sorry. Yes.
Did you want to go to personnel next?
Oh, right. We were going to do that. Okay. Yes. So Mr. Locatell, we're going to move to personnel.
I have some report on negotiations, regular labor negotiations, and then discussion of the change in the MOU. And all of those would happen in executive session. So if you'd like to do that right now, I am perfectly amenable to that.
Because then we have to come out and vote on the MOU, correct?
Right.
Right.
Okay, so be it resolved that the Central Berkshire Regional School Committee goes into executive session at 8:21 p.m. in accordance with MGL Chapter 38, Section 21A2 and 3 to discuss strategy for negotiations with, I'm sorry, I didn't read this ahead of time. With CBEA and NAVSCME bargaining units, for which the chair has declared an executive session is necessary to protect the bargaining position of the committee, and to reconvene in open session at the conclusion of the executive session.
Second.
We have a second. We have any discussion? Seeing none. Oh, Mr. Stewart.
For the sake of everybody else, that there's still, there's 118 people still on here by my screen. I just wonder if it would make sense for everybody else who's paying attention that we did the executive session at the end of the meeting, towards the end of the meeting, so that they can follow along and not have to wait for us to come out of executive session, whenever that may be.
Can I think many are staying on for the MOU.
I'm sorry?
I was just saying, I think many of the people are staying on for the vote on the MOU.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So we'll go into executive session and we'll have the vote. Okay? So I'm sorry, but Superintendent Blake Davis, will you do a roll call?
Mr. Alpert,
Yes.
Mr. Bartels,
Yes.
Mr. Case,
Yes.
Mr. DeFazio,
Yes.
Misty Tomaso,
Yes.
Dr. Eberwein,
Yes.
Mr. Emerson,
Yes.
Dr. Jelinas,
Yes.
Mr. Luckatell,
Yes.
Ms. Latazori,
Yes.
Ms. Lounsbury,
Yes.
Mr. Peters,
Yes.
Mr. Stewart,
Yes.
Mrs. Tucker,
Yes.
Dr. Kraft Reese.
Yes, welcome back, everybody. Mr. Locatell? Mr. Locatell, would you like to make a motion?
Yes. Be it resolved that the school committee ratifies the memorandum of understanding between the district and the Central Berkshire Education Association dated December 2nd, 2020, which agrees to practices during the COVID-19 pandemic, pending ratification by the CBEA.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? I don't see any, so seeing no further discussion, like a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Alpert,
Yes.
Mr. Bartels,
Yes.
Mr. Case,
Yes.
Mr. DeFazio,
Yes.
Misty Tomaso,
Yes.
Dr. Eberwein,
Yes.
Mr. Emerson,
Yes.
Dr. Jelinas, Dr. Jelinas,
You're
Muted.
muted.
There we
Dr.
go. Yes.
Mr. Luckatell,
Yes.
Ms. Latazori,
Yes.
Ms. Lounsbury,
Yes.
Mr. Peters,
Yes.
Mr. Stewart,
Yes.
Mrs. Tucker,
I'm sorry, I missed executive session because of Wi-Fi troubles. So am I still allowed to vote?
Yes.
You can.
yes.
Okay, then I'll vote yes based on the written stuff. Thank you.
Dr. Kraft Reese.
Yes. Okay. Motion carries. Thank you very much, Mr. Locatell. I think now we are back into the regular routine of our agenda. So we're going back to the secretary's report. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of November 12th, please?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll do a roll call vote.
Mr. Alpert, Mr. Alpert,
Yes.
Ms.
You didn't get my yes?
Yes, sorry, Mr. Bartels,
Yes.
Mr. Bartels,
Yes.
Mr. Case,
Yes.
Mr. DeFazio,
Yes.
Misty Tomaso,
Yes.
Dr. Eberwein,
Abstain.
Mr. Emerson,
Yes.
Dr. Jelinas,
Yes.
Mr. Luckatell,
Yes.
Ms. Latazori,
Yes.
Ms. Lounsbury,
Yes.
Mr. Peters,
Yes.
Mr. Stewart,
Yes.
Mrs. Tucker,
Yes.
Dr. Kraft Reese.
Yes, okay, thank you. Now we're on to the financial report. And Mr. Peters, would you read them all and then we'll vote on them as one, please?
Sure. Motion to approve warrant number AP 2021-10 dated November 20th, 2020, previously signed. Accounts payable in the amount of $902,533.72.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, we need a roll call vote. Oh, no, we're doing that at the end. Okay. I did say that. Go
Yes,
ahead,
you
Mr. Peters.
Okay. Motion to approve warrant number APW 2021-7 dated November 20, 2020, previously signed. Accounts payable in the amount of $2,907,200.58.
Second,
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Thank you.
Motion to approve warrant number PR 2021-11 dated November 25th, 2020. Payroll in the amount of $635,842.75.
second,
We have a motion and a second. Thank you.
Motion to approve warrant number PR 2021-11D dated November 25th, 2020. Accounts payable in the amount of $249,915.52.
second.
We have a motion and a second. Thank you.
Can I just say one thing, Barbara?
Yes.
This morning when the warrants went out, these were not previously signed, but they are all previously signed now. I just wanted to make note of that.
Thank you.
Okay, warrant to approve number AP 2021-11 dated December 4th, 2020. Accounts payable in the amount of $338,590.18.
Second,
Okay, a motion and a second. And the last one, Mr. Peters.
Motion to approve warrant number APW 2021-8 dated December 4th, 2020. Accounts payable in the amount of $41,729.58.
second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on all of these warrants. Any discussion? Seeing none, Superintendent Blake Davis, will you take a roll call?
Yes, Mr. Alpert,
Yes.
Mr. Bartels,
Yes.
Mr. Case,
Yes.
Mr. DeFazio,
Yes.
Misty Tomaso,
Yes,
Dr. Eberwein,
Yes.
Mr. Emerson,
Yes.
Dr. Jelinas,
Yes.
Mr. Luckatell,
Yes.
Ms. Latazori,
Yes.
Ms. Lounsbury,
Yes.
Mr. Peters,
Yes.
Mr. Stewart,
Yes.
Mrs. Tucker,
Yes.
Dr. Kraft Reese.
Yes, thank you. Motion carries for all of the warrants. There are no gifts and donations this time, so we'll move on to report of the chair. And I've asked Bonnie to speak very briefly about the regional agreement update.
thank you, Barbara. So first of all, I wanted to apologize to the committee. I've been had an unexpected health issue arise that prevented me from really focusing on the regional agreement, but things have settled down a little bit. So with regard to the regional agreement, the current regional agreement dated 1997 was amended with 9 amendments. In 2009, a committee met with representatives from 7 towns. They worked on a revision which ultimately did not come to the school committee for endorsement. That was followed in 2019. In July of 2019, Attorney Dupre worked on a draft to reflect that Cummington had voted to withdraw, and it was sent to DESE. DESE then wanted further changes. So moving forward, what I'd like to propose is that a small working group of school committee members be formed, and I'll contact people to work on changes that are consistent with the history and the Mars recommendation that was made to us in the summer. And it's important to build on what was previously incorporated into the 2018 draft, which included reference to OPEB, and really work on building what has been done, not recreating the wheel. Once that small group has met, then we would potentially review the document that we come up with Attorney Dupre, and review it with DESE to see if it's even going to fly with DESE, with the goal to then form a more formal regional agreement amendment committee with representatives of the school committee, superintendent, and the 7 towns, potentially with select board members and finance committee members from the 7 towns, along with Attorney Dupree, to move forward in a more formal process, which would then ultimately, hopefully, result in a regional agreement modification being presented through a formal process to elect boards in the 7 towns and to the towns to be put on a warrant for an annual meeting or a special town meeting. So that's kind of the framework that I'm looking at. And also to emphasize that the tone of the presentation and how we deal with the towns is really important. So I'm hoping that we can move forward pretty quickly with a smaller working group to get the wheels in motion.
Thank you, Bonnie. I appreciate that. And
Thank
I'm
you.
glad you're feeling better now.
Thank you.
Moving on to consent agenda. For those of you who have been here before, you know that that's something that I've wanted to have happen. And for the new members, it's a way in which we can consolidate some of the routine items on our agenda to make this meeting go more quickly. So for example, the warrants would be included in the consent agenda, the minutes of the secretary's report, and the minutes of the regular meeting, and then the other routine items that could be included. I would let you know each week, each month, at each meeting, what is included in the consent agenda, and if there's an item on it that you would like to see removed, so we may discuss it, we could do that. But that's something that I think would streamline our meetings. And I think we can all agree that with all these roll call votes, it would be nice to have a streamlined approach. So, Mr. Peters, do you have the motion for the consent agenda? You do not. Okay. So I can read it. It is, be it resolved that the Central Berkshire Regional School District approve the use of a consent agenda.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Yes, Mr. DeFazio.
I think one thing I think you didn't point out that any member of the committee could request that anything that you put in consent agenda be pulled out of it so that we can discuss it. And then the one question I had, we would find out what was in the consent agenda when we get our packet?
Yes.
Or would it be, okay, so.
Yes, it would be delineated there. And it could change each time we meet. Okay, so any more discussion? Seeing none, oh, Mr. Case? No, okay. Seeing none, roll call vote, please. Superintendent?
Mr. Alpert,
Yes.
Mr. Bartels,
Yes.
Mr. Case,
Yes.
Mr. DeFazio,
Yes.
Ms. DiTomaso,
Yes.
Dr. Eberwein,
Yes.
Mr. Emerson,
Yes.
Dr. Jelinas,
Yes.
Mr. Locatell,
Yes.
Ms. Latazori,
Yes.
Ms. Lounsbury,
Yes.
Mr. Peters, Mr. Peters,
Yes.
Mr. Stewart,
Yes.
Mrs. Tucker,
Yes.
Dr. Kraft-Reese.
Yes, thank you. Motion carries. Okay, the last thing that I'm going to report on is the approval of the superintendent's goals. And we discussed the superintendent's goals in policy. It will move back to personnel where it belongs, but we had a lengthy discussion in policy, and Superintendent Blake Davis was there to answer our questions and to give us further information. And then she presented them to a full school committee meeting. So Mr. Peters, can you make a motion, please?
Sure. be it resolved that the Central Berkshire Regional School Committee accept the superintendent's goals for 2020-2021.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Yes, Mrs. Tomaso.
I would just like to say that I applaud our superintendent for her goals. I think these are very aggressive during this COVID experience. So I applaud your enthusiasm and I really applaud your efforts.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Okay, seeing no further discussion. Can we have, oh, I can't tell if Mr. Case's hand is up or not. Okay, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Alpert,
Yes.
Mr. Bartels,
Yes.
Mr. Case,
Yes. And I'm working on my iPhone, which is why I'm trying to unmute myself.
Mr. DeFazio,
Yes.
Ms. DiTomaso,
Yes.
Dr. Eberwein,
Yes.
Mr. Emerson,
Yes.
Dr. Jelinas,
Yes.
Mr. Locatell,
Yes.
Ms. Latazori,
Yes.
Ms. Lounsbury,
Yes.
Mr. Peters,
Yes.
Mr. Stewart,
Yes.
Mrs. Tucker,
Yes.
Dr. Kraft Reese.
Yes. Okay. Superintendent's goals have been approved. Thank you. Subcommittee reports and recommendations. We'll go to curriculum with Ellen.
Hi, we met this past Tuesday at 7 p.m. on Zoom. Lisa Herland gave a presentation assisted by Superintendent Leslie Blake Davis and the principal of Craneville, Annie Pecor, on social emotional learning during COVID and responsive classroom and restorative justice. It was a great presentation, so much so that we thought that the full school committee would like to hear it. It would be very informative. So we're going to bring forth that presentation at our next school committee meeting. So I won't go too much into the details of what we discussed, but Lisa Herland did tell us about this platform called Panorama, where they surveyed the students from grades 3 to 5 and then 6 to 12 on how they've been dealing during the switchovers and during COVID. And good news to report is that for the 3rd to 5th graders, the 2/3 of the students report not having overly challenging feelings and also still feeling pretty positive during all of this. The 6th to 12th graders, 50% responded that they weren't having challenging feelings and were still maintaining positive feelings during this. I question if that is due to COVID or just the age group shifting the percentages a little bit. But both groups reported that to about 85% on average that they felt like they had supportive relationships at home or at school, an adult they could reach out to talk to about anything going on or if they needed help. I thought that was really great and just a testament that how on the support network that we have in Central Berkshire. But other than that, I really want to wait until next subcommittee meeting for the full or the next committee meeting to go over the presentation that Lisa will present to all of us. Other than that, we have another, our next subcommittee meeting for curriculum is scheduled for January 26th at 7 p.m. And we are going to discuss benchmarking data and school improvement plans.
Thank you, Ellen. I agree. It was really informative. Any questions?
Can I add something?
Absolutely.
I just wanted to commend the presenter and Leslie Blake Davis, not only with the program that was being presented, but the kind of ongoing staff development that is being used to reinforce this with the staff. That is so vital, and what was described was very impressive. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Yeah, the full in-service day that we just had yesterday in the district revolved all around this.
Social emotional learning. Yeah, it's really, really good. Thank you. Okay. Finance. Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you, Barbara. Finance has not met since our last meeting. Our next meeting will be December 15th at 6 p.m. remote. Topics to be determined, although we anticipate trying to finalize the fiscal 21 budget based on what the state comes back with. So that's one of the items that we will be discussing. And I believe we have a memorandum of understanding with the Do For Bus Company. We did not meet in the Finance Committee to discuss this, but we do have a motion to make. And Greg, I don't know if you wanted to give any update on this
So this
before I
is,
make the motion.
Robert, do you mind?
Not at all. Please do.
So this is very similar to the MOU we had in the spring. So we would be paying 50% of the costs of the busing on days we are fully remote. All 5 schools would need to be remote in order to get the 50%, because even if 1 or 2 close, we still have the same amount of buses on the roads. With the routes this year, with the hybrid schedule, they're just, the buses are going from town to town all over the place. They're getting clean in between, but the bus routes are completely different than they have been in the past. The only addition on this one is if we are remote, we are only paying for the sped runs we use. So if during remote, we don't use the special ed buses for special ed students, we do not have to pay those costs. Our normal contract has us paying, we tell them how many buses we need, then we pay for 180 days. So with the MOU, we're only paying for days used of special ed runs.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if there are no questions, I'm going to make the motion. Be it resolved that the Central Berkshire Regional School Committee approve a memorandum of understanding with the Central Berkshire Regional School District and Do For Bus Company, which specifically amends the contract for the 2020-2021 school year due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Let's have a quick question for Greg.
Yes.
Yes.
Hey, Greg, the drivers get paid, so whether they're driving or not, is that still the case?
No, so that is one change. Thank you for mentioning that. In the spring, all drivers were paid for days they were not, even if we were remote. That was Do For also received the stimulus package from the government in the spring. So they had that to make up for the loss of revenue from the district to pay them. So what they normally do over the winter, they do go, or during the summer, they do go on unemployment. Bill Do For is very confident that he can get the buses back on the road, that the bus drivers would come back immediately if we do move from remote to hybrid or in full in person.
Okay. So just to be clear, the way I understand it then is we're still paying them, even though the buses might not be running on a remote day, but the drivers aren't getting paid?
So we are paying for the costs of like the insurances to have that part.
Okay.
But the drivers are not getting paid during the remote.
Okay. I would advocate that. Obviously this is not my place. I've been at the table with all the work you've all been doing. These are low wage workers who I think we just want to make sure.
And I will say I did fight for that because that is something we did have in the spring. So I did try very hard to get that in there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Any other discussion? Okay, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Alpert,
Yes.
Mr. Bartels,
Yes.
Mr. Case,
You're muted.
Mr.
Yes.
Case,
Yes.
Mr. DeFazio,
Yes.
Ms. DiTomaso,
Yes.
Dr. Eberwein,
Yes.
Mr. Emerson,
Yes.
Dr. Jelinas,
Yes.
Mr. Locatell,
Yes.
Ms. Latazori,
Yes.
Ms. Lounsbury,
Yes.
Leslie, you're muted now.
Wondering what happened to my vote.
okay, sorry. Mr. Peters,
Yes, thank you.
sorry. Mr. Stewart,
Yes.
Mrs. Tucker,
Yes.
Dr. Kraft Reese.
Yes, motion carries. Thank you. Okay, policy.
So we haven't met since our last meeting. When we do meet next, one new item to discuss is an anti-racism resolution proposed by MASC. When we do meet, Debbie White will be involved because the Equity Diversity Policy Planning Committee has some proposed changes to the MASC resolution. We don't have a date set yet. We lost several members in the last few months, so we're waiting until the reorganization when we get back up to full size to set a meeting date.
Thank you. That will be soon, as soon as people send me their information. Thank you. Any questions for Mr. DeFazio? Okay, so we've had personnel, we've had safety and wellness. So now we're up to Wacona Building Project. Mr. Peters.
Sure. Just briefly, we do have a school building committee meeting next week, and two purposes of that meeting. One is just a quarterly update. The other is that, as I mentioned in the last meeting, there's some discussions around updating the HVAC systems to be really COVID capable, and there's a couple of changes that we're still looking at to implement, and there will be some cost implications there. So we're going to have the school building committee, full school building committee, report to them, have that report to them, and then vote on that those changes. Other than that, the things are going, on as scheduled, on schedule still. They're moving right along, and they're obviously working in the cold right now, but they're closing it up with some sheeting and going to get some heat in there by the end of the month. So,
okay. Any questions for Mr. Peters? Okay, thank you very much. Now we are up to superintendent's report.
Thank you, Dr. Kraft Reese. The bulk of my report is going to be delivered by our athletic director, Mr. Shannon, and then I believe Mr. Rob will also be joining him. I will say just a couple of things though. One is that I did go on the most recent tour of the new building, and it's pretty incredible. It's a beautiful building. It was the first time I've been, on a tour where you could really get a feel for what it's going to look and feel like. And just the stairs are done, so you can walk upstairs. You can see the views are pretty amazing, and it's just it was such a positive experience, especially right now where there are so many difficult and stressful challenges. So it's on schedule, and it was I just like I said, it was pretty great. It was amazing. So I don't want to forget to say that. I do also want to just recognize that there was some pretty incredible professional development that occurred yesterday. It was a full professional development day. I think it was really a testament to some of the strengths that we have in-house, our collective strengths around teaching and learning. I think we've had a lot of sort of outside professional development in the past few years. And I think yesterday, I would start out with a high school where we had Principal Rob and our instructional coach and chemistry teacher, Mr. Therian, really do some professional development around asynchronous learning, which is it's a huge challenge. It's really helping guide students on those tasks that are less directed by teachers and more independent. It was a very bottom-up approach. They really led them through an exercise that was very reflective. They had them, teachers, they really consolidated sort of some of the more successful experiences. And I guess what really stood out for me is when I could hear the teachers really talk about some of the more successful experiences, there was a clear theme or common thread around some of the work that had been done in the past around universal design for learning. So what we used to call as an acronym UDL. So really the more choices, the more different modalities that students were offered, it seemed like they were more motivated. So they're really on a path to sort of collect sort of those strategies and build upon their own internal strengths. They also did some work around some of the things that were challenges and some of the things that, you know, from an I standpoint, what didn't go as well and why. So, and then at the middle school, we had Lisa Herland and Kelly Flynn. Kelly had attended a responsive classroom training, and that, as she would probably say, that there's so much to that, but we really chose K through 8, one component of it to really to present and to train. And that was really the morning meeting, which on a middle school level is really more around advisory. And it's really intended to build on the social and emotional learning standards that we have on the state level. And so just sort of starting out with morning meeting, and they did an amazing job. And they also managed to build some fun into it, because the small group that I was able to go into, there was definitely some laughing, which was great. And then for the elementary, there was, I would say there was a group of teachers that had done some training in a responsive classroom over the summer. Sarah DeFazio, Melinda Finnerty, Caitlin Manns, and they collectively came together and again focused on morning meeting, and which is really guided by the strategies around responsive classroom. And again, just to go back to what is our goal, like what are we aiming for, and the goal is to increase students or to help them really understand the standards around social and emotional learning. So those are self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision making. So I feel confident that we're moving in that direction. It's definitely a rollout. But I think during right now, I think it's essential. It's so important. So all those things that I think that we worked on yesterday were very relevant, and I think the presenters did an amazing job, and there was just there was high engagement. So I was really proud of the work yesterday that everybody did. I guess the only other thing I wanted, so that next I'm really going to turn it over to Mr. Shannon. I think we're moving into our winter sports season. Obviously, as you know, it's not going to look the same. We definitely I know it's important to him, it's important to Mr. Rob, that there's a full understanding of what that could potentially look like from the school committee's perspective, and that there's some support. Part of the process is always that Mr. Shannon, Mr. Rob, and I, and the Dalton Board of Health, Jane Smith, that we meet and we collaborate as well. So there's different layers to that. So you should know that there's a fair amount of behind the scenes work that happens to really ensure the safety of our students, but to also make sure that they have some options, because as we know, some of our students, this is the thing, like, you know, for some of them it's the arts, some of them it's sports. There are these things that keep them engaged in school. So I do want to I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Shannon.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to share my screen here in a second. I've got a presentation to go through. It'll be broken up into a couple of parts. I will go back and do a brief background, because I know we have several new members on the committee that were not here for the fall presentation. So the first 2 slides are pretty similar to that. The guidance has absolutely changed. The EEA and those organizations have been updating things as we go. I'm also going to give you a quick recap on what the fall experience was like, which was incredibly positive. And then kind of the role of one of the big committees at the state that's focused on the medical side of things. And then Mr. Rob's going to jump in for a bit. And then I'm going to try, without getting too far into the weeds, although I can pretty well prepared to answer just about every question on these sports that we're going to talk about. I'm just getting into so that everybody understands safety protocols that are in place for each and every sport, specifically and also in general. So I'm just going to share my screen here real quick. And okay. Hopefully you can all see that. Thank you for having us this evening. Well, let's see what's going on. There we go. So it's being a little slow here. Hang tight for a second. There we go. Okay. So for some of the new members, there's a couple of organizations involved in making all of these decisions. DESE is obviously kind of the umbrella group. They've tasked the EEA, which is the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, with getting into the specifics around sports and recreation from K to 12. And so this presentation is based entirely on EEA guidance, DESE guidance, the MIA COVID Task Force, the MIA Board of Directors recommendations. I'm a member of that task force, and we've been working pretty hard for what seems like forever over the summer and currently to try to make some informed decisions and recommendations on a statewide level. And where we are right now is trying to take some of those state recommendations and make a local decision. Just a couple of quick things to know is that every school that chooses to have athletics is agreeing to follow all EEA, DESE, MIA guidance. And the other key piece of that that's not here is that local boards of health also have sort of the final say over things. So we need to make sure that we're also following any local guidance that we impose. The EEA and MIA agreed to allow and created a safe pathway for alpine skiing, basketball, Nordic skiing, and swimming. They've created pathways for ice hockey as well, but in Berkshire County, we've chosen not to have ice hockey primarily because we don't have anybody to compete with. There are only 3 schools that offer hockey. One of them had already canceled before we made our decision. So having no one to compete with would leave our kids with no one to play. And my understanding is there's going to be an organization in Pittsfield that's going to try to put something together for high school hockey players that still want to play. The next slide here is something I didn't address in the fall, but I think it's important in this particular case, especially with folks' concerns around the state about rising cases. The Sports Medicine Committee and the structure of the MIA is a committee that's focused entirely on the safety of student athletes. It's primarily, as you can see, comprised of doctors, nurses, infectious disease people, a lot of medical people. And it also has school committee members, principals, superintendents around the state. Nothing, I'm going to say, it's a blanket statement, nothing passes in the state of Massachusetts without the approval of the Sports Medicine Committee and their high scrutiny. And that includes this set of recommendations that we're about to go through. Because their ultimate goal is safety, and so they've heavily weighed in on every recommendation that is you're about to see. Before I turn over to Mr. Rob briefly, I just want to recap for fall sports, especially for the newer members. So from July to November, we ran 2 athletic programs. We ran summer conditioning through 4 of our coaches, Mr. Campbell, Mrs. Smith, Mr. Kovacs, and Mr. Massimo, ran voluntary conditioning throughout the summer for nearly 125 student athletes. Again, we created safety protocols for that. We talked about that over the summer, but that went incredibly well. In fall sports, which we offered formally, we had almost 240 kids sign up, and they competed in over 200 matches, practices, races. And in soccer, the sport of soccer, and in the sport of football, they played some flag football. Those were sponsored by the CRA. With 240 students competing, well over a dozen coaches coaching, there were no cases of COVID, no students testing positive out of each student, each coach, or anything related to those athletic contests, which we're incredibly proud of. And I think that the protocols that we put in place for the fall worked perfectly, were enforced consistently, and I'm confident in our plan going into the winter. So before I get into my next slide, which includes our proposal, I'm going to just kind of turn over to Mr. Rob. He's got a couple of things I think to address.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Shannon, and thank you to the school committee for having us tonight. I'll be very, very brief. Our proposal for winter athletics tonight is based on many hours of work that was done at the state level and then eventually trickled down to the local level. But ultimately, the state sets the minimum, and then we at the local level take it from there. And the work that's gone into this plan, winter sports can be, at least on paper, a little bit more of a complicated situation, especially because there are a couple indoor sports such as swimming and basketball. But ultimately, all of this comes down to hopefully your approval tonight and our execution of the plan. I will say what's about to be presented is something that I'm very much confident in. I have a great deal of confidence and trust in our athletic director, obviously, but also our winter coaches. Our winter coaches happen to be highly organized individuals, detail-oriented people. They want to make this work. They want to do it right. They want to follow the parameters that we're setting up for them. So it makes it very easy for me to support this presentation. The fact of the matter is if I didn't support it, this presentation would be made in the first place. So I'm very appreciative of the work that's gone into it. The other thing I want to preemptively answer is an inevitable question that would probably come up tonight is, well, who else is having winter sports in the county? We are going to stay within the Berkshire County bubble as we did for fall sports, but oddly enough, the prospects for having competition against other schools, the prospects of other schools competing for the winter are actually better than the fall. We had only several schools this fall actively compete in golf and cross-country running, but we're looking like the prospects in winter sports in Berkshire County are better. So if we are approved tonight, we will be one of 4 school districts that will be looking forward to winter sports this year. There possibly may be a couple more, upwards of 6 this winter. So numerically, that's roughly half the county. So the prospects of winter sports is actually looking better in terms of competition than it did in the fall. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Mr. Shannon, and he can get into the specifics about the plan.
Okay. All right, thank you. So the way I've kind of broken this down is kind of laid out the proposal to start with, and then I can get into some general essential modifications, and then some of the sport specific ones. And then obviously if there's questions, I can get into some questions, and we'll wrap up with a couple of finishing slides. But the proposal is simply this: to recommend that winter sports be played at Wacona to the greatest extent possible under EEA and MIA guidance in the following sports. So beginning on December 14th, and this is consistent with the MIA and EEA recommendation, to allow socially distanced conditioning in small cohorts of 6 to 10. That is us being more cautious and safer than what some areas of the state may do. There are some areas of the state that are going to begin full practices on December 14th, and there are going to be areas of the state that may play before Christmas, and that's not our intent. Our intent is to get kids moving and getting them with some small cohorts of their classmates with their coaches, and then just start getting them into some condition. Our plan is to also begin practices on January 4th. Again, those are in-house. Those would be limited in number. For example, in the sport of basketball, there would be no more than 15 kids in the gym at a time. And then, skiing is obviously outdoors, and swimming has their own restrictions based on the facilities that we're using, of either the CRA, the YMCA, or the Boys and Girls Club. And then competitions in Berkshire County would not begin until we return to a hybrid setting. So a pretty consistent theme at this moment is each school that's allowed to have sports right now in Berkshire County, we've all agreed, because we all know kind of what's coming, that nobody here is going to allow competitions to take place until we're remote. I will say that there are parts of the state that did have competitions this fall while they were remote, and there are schools that may this winter, but we are not going to begin competitions until after we return to school, which right now, is January 19th. And I'm not going to, there's a million things I've written here. Some of the guidance is pretty detailed, but I think some of the key points that are essential here, and this is a bit of a change from the fall, but I think it's an important change to note. Masks must be worn at all times, no exceptions. That's by every participant. That's by officials, that's by coaches, doesn't matter the sport. The one exception, which I'll get to in a bit, has to do with a few seconds of swimming, but otherwise everyone is masked the entire time. Similar to the way we do it in school, there will be designated and supervised areas for mask breaks. Students must maintain 6 feet of distancing at all times, except when they're in the specific competition. And I can get into that when we discuss each particular sport. There's pretty specific and frequent sanitizing rules that we're going to follow. Many of them are the same rules we followed in the fall, but there are some enhancements to that, especially when it comes to the sport of basketball and swimming. There will be site staff on hand, which was the case in the fall. I attended every cross-country race that took place at Wacona to handle the logistics of that. Every Saturday morning we had a race. I was here at 7 o'clock, getting ready to go. We had site staff on the property, and we would in these sports enhance that staff to ensure that we're obviously in COVID-19 compliance. We're aiding and sanitizing, but we're following and ensuring the safety of our kids and our participants. A couple of other key things: locker rooms are not going to be used. Busing is not going to be provided. Those are two key pieces that we want to eliminate to, again, stress the health and safety of our kids. Throwing them on the bus for an hour is just not going to work. In fact, that's probably one of the highest risk things we could do right now is throw kids, on a bus with a bunch of equipment down to Mount Everett or anywhere else around the state. That's the kind of bus trip we're talking about. We did not provide transportation in the fall, and it worked quite well. And we would be able to schedule to ensure that the competitions are as accessible as possible, particularly using weekends and later in the evenings when it comes to things like basketball and skiing. So the final piece of this, and this is a pretty common accommodation, but part of it has to do with the size of our facility. Spectators are not going to be allowed at home Wacona events. I believe that will end up being a pretty consistent theme around the county. A couple of reasons for that. The swimming facilities are not going to allow spectators, so that's one. The ski lodges are not open. They're not going to allow spectators in there. The ski races are going to take place on high school sites, so we're not going to allow that to take place. And the fact of the matter is we just can't fit spectators in our gym. Our gym is just too small. When you socially distance the teams for the sport of basketball, spectators are not gonna be able to be present. And as Mr. Rob said, we're going to play a Berkshire County only schedule. A couple of quick things when it comes to each sport. I mentioned where races are going to be held at home sites, and that's primarily because private facilities we've used in the past are either out of the county or out of the state. And Natu as a site is not going to be usable because they're not going to restrict public access. So if we're trying to ensure the safety of our kids, we want to make sure they're on school sites where we can control the public access. Simple thing for anybody that knows skating. Classic races are not going to be held because that is not conducive to social distancing. Skate races are. We're going to stagger arrival times. We're going to stagger all the gaps between waves. We're going to race as a cohort of a school, not with specifically other schools. It's going to look a lot like cross country running did in the fall. Again, kids are masked at all times. And the other key piece of this, which was a recommendation in the fall, but it's a specific enforcement now, is at the conclusion of a meet, match, or game, everybody must leave. There's no hanging around. There's no media interviews. There's none of that. No locker room access. Everybody needs to be prepared to show up and play, and everybody needs to be prepared to leave when the game ends or match ends. When it comes to alpine skiing, a lot of the things are pretty much the same. Again, we're going to race in cohorts. We won't be using the lodge. They're going to have to increase, gaps in race time. There's each sport was coming up with specific things that are sport specific. Alpine skiing possibly is the easiest one because they're up on a mountain, they're racing one at a time. So we just have to space that out a little bit differently. And again, kids can't hang around that particular race. Basketball is the big one. In fact, their packet of accommodations is about 4 pages long. So I'm going to try to summarize that as best I can. And I also sat in on the basketball town hall meeting that the MI ran, as well as the sports medicine committee meeting that they ran this week, to just listen in to rationale and all that sort of stuff. So I'd be prepared as possible for this. Basketball has been modified to the point where the sports medicine committee, the basketball committee, and the medical experts that they've consulted, they've deemed that it is as safe as humanly possible. And I would equate it to probably soccer in the fall when it comes to that, although the sport is a little bit different. The key piece here that's different is they're going to have to wear masks. Some of the rules have been modified to reduce intermittent contact, which is a term that the EEA uses, and obviously reducing intentional contact. So they've changed end of game fouls. They've eliminated the tip off. They've reduced the number of people in the free throw lane. And they've pretty much eliminated all what's called off ball contact, which exists when you're guarding the person that doesn't have the ball. A lot of that stuff is going to be, there's some new rules and enforcements related to that. Similar to basketball, similar to volleyball, schools that had volleyball in the fall, there's sanitation requirements for basketballs. So you're not just using one game for the ball. we're using between 4 and 8 that are constantly going to be rotated in and sanitized as the game progresses. Players entering and exit the game each and every time have to sanitize completely. And obviously we're going to be discouraging kids from touching their faces, touching their hands. There's no high-fiving, there's no huddling up, there's none of that stuff. Chairs in the gym, if for anybody who's an NBA fan, it's going to look a little bit like the NBA bubble in that the chairs are going to be spaced entirely on one side of the gym, 6 feet apart. Kids are going to be assigned a chair. If they leave the chair to go into the game, the chair gets sanitized by one of our volunteers. There's some talk about putting one team on one side of the gym and one team on the other. Some facilities can do that. We probably could, but that's something that we haven't quite gone through yet. The last piece of that that's kind of sort of important is in the gym, doors are going to be open, the air handlers are going to be on, and we're going to also place full-size air purifiers, 2 by each bench and 1 or 2 by the scoring table, so that we're improving as much air movement as possible. And that was this is something that we added that's not in the state guidance, but one of the things the EEA and the Sports Medicine Committee stressed was the need for fresh air movement and air purification. And this would more than check that box. In terms of swimming, only participants are allowed in the deck, so that's coaches, and that's a limited number of swimmers. If the facility has a limit, we're going to have to limit the number of swimmers that can race in a given time or stagger the amount of races. Swimmers need to be prepared as everybody does to show up and compete, because locker rooms aren't available. They will the teams will be on opposite sides of the deck. There is a chance that we're going to switch to virtual swim meets because half of our league is outside of Berkshire County or outside of the state. And so we may, Eastern Mass tested this out in the fall, and Central Mass using virtual swim meets. And that is something that we're probably going to look to employ as we compete against, New Lebanon High School and Berlin High School and so on from New York State. Kind of cheering. If you've been to a swim meet, they get loud, they cheer, they yell, everything. All sports, that's not allowed. It's going to be something that we're going to have to teach, similar to the 6 feet mask up thing that we do in school. But this is something that's going to have to be discouraged, because the louder you are, the more vapor you're putting in the air. And so that's something that we have more droplets in the air. So that's something we need to enforce. I think that's probably it for swimming. Before I get into this last piece, does anyone have any questions for me about the modifications, whether it's sports specific or anything? I did attend some meetings, and I've been in a lot of meetings and asked some questions about, why they did certain things. But before I finish up here, are there any questions about this stuff? All right, I can't see any faces, so I'll just finish up and stop sharing my screen, and we'll see where we go. Last couple of slides here. So if this gets approved, this will, we'll communicate this to all families. NESICA students in grades 7 and 8 are eligible for alpine and Nordic skiing. That's been something we've done for years. That's something we plan to continue. Our principals at NESICA Wilcona do a great job communicating with families, so they're more than happy to always send athletic information through their weekly emails. I'll send information, and we'll obviously post it on social media. And if this is approved, as we did in the fall, but obviously this is a new set of coaches, we're going to have some pretty intense trainings, a couple of hours, going through all of these different things that I've listed here, making sure that they're comfortable planning socially distanced activities, making sure they understand the logistics of competition, health protocols, all the guidelines, whether they're general guidelines or sports-specific guidelines. Those are things that we need to make sure our coaches understand and are comfortable enforcing. And as a matter of I guess a point, at the very beginning of this, I'm going to be quite present in a lot of these to make sure our kids understand and our coaches are supported in all of the things that we're asking them to do. The last slide I really want to end with, and this is the biggest thing, is our purpose for having athletics has nothing to do with winning championships or games. The fact of the matter is our kids are struggling in a lot of ways. And for about 2/3 of our school who participate in some form of athletics, in addition to the kids that do other extracurriculars, this time has been pretty challenging from a mental health, physical perspective, and an academic perspective. And I think that us being able to provide this safely really will allow our kids to have a small sense of normalcy, in the meantime. And their physical health is suffering, their mental health is suffering. We're seeing some, obviously, the academic consequences of that in some cases. And so as a matter of fact, kids who play sports, it's well known that their academic achievement is superior, their physical health is better, their mental health is better, and frankly, they make connections with adults that they trust. And I think that that's, to me, the biggest piece that we can offer our kids at this time. And I'm confident that we can do it safely, as we did in the fall. So I don't know if I can answer any questions. Like I said, I live this. I've been thinking about this for 6 months, 7 months. So I'm happy to address any concerns or questions anyone may have from the committee.
Anybody?
Yeah, if I may ask a question.
Yes, Mr. Case.
Mr. Shannon, I'm a little bit familiar with Nordic skiing, although it was half a century ago, but doesn't the mask really inhibit the amount of air that the cross-country skiers can bring in?
So that's a good question. That came up quite a bit in the summer. And so what they ended up having to do was the sports medicine committee and some other, I don't know, whether it's college groups or not, they did try to do a lot of studies. And there were some, rumors going around that CO2 builds up and all this other stuff. What we've learned is that kids who condition wearing masks, practice wearing masks, they are able to adapt. And in fact, I mean, I'm not going to put Mr. Rob on the spot, but we both attended a lot of soccer games this year in youth soccer games and high school soccer games. And you can tell which teams practice with masks and which teams don't. And I'm going to tell you that our kids were able to do it very well. There were some towns in this county that really struggled. And I think it's because their coaches weren't having kids practice with masks on a regular basis. The last race of the year, the cross country race, was run in masks. And our kids did well because they were used to wearing masks for most of their practices throughout the fall. So I do agree, but I can also say that confidently watching a lot of my own kids and a lot of kids in the county being able to play soccer and run a cross-country race in a mask. The Nordic kids, their times may be a little slower because they might have to suck a little bit more air, but I can tell you that training with them, they'll adapt. Similar to people who train at high altitude, I suppose.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions?
I just wanted to
Go ahead, Mr. Alpert.
I just wanted to compliment you on the amount of thought and planning that went into this. And I know Mr. Case talked about cross-country skiing. I'm sitting here having played basketball and saying, how could I ever play basketball with a mask on? But you answered the question, so go right ahead.
I appreciate it. Well, it's a lot of people worked on this, so there's a lot. This, I appreciate it, but there's a lot of hands that went into this one.
Well, if I may, through the
Yes,
chair.
Mr. Eberwein. Dr. Eberwein.
Yeah, just Jared and Aaron, I can't thank you two enough for the amazing amount of hard work you put into this. And I thought you ran a fall season as good as could be run. But I'm going to tell you my real struggle is that we're not bringing kids to school and we're bringing kids together for sports. And I think that's a really difficult thing to justify. So everything you've argued for is incredibly grounded, but I think there's an inconsistency there that I worry about. And I appreciate the fact that you're pushing off competition until we do return, which is not until now, January 19th at the earliest. So I just want to make that comment for the good of the order. I don't know if we're taking a vote on this tonight.
Yes, there will be a vote.
So I won't support it as it's rolled out. But I do want to just be clear that I do support this entire effort to get kids back working with each other, staying physically active. And obviously this impacts, a kid, my daughter, right? So in some ways I'm voting against her interests here because I want her in pre-calc and on the basketball court.
Madam Chair, can I just make a comment real quick?
Absolutely, Mr.
All right, so yeah, Dr. Eberwein, I really appreciate your comments, and I know all your kids. A lot of them played sports. I know your support for that. This is definitely something that has come up at the task force level. There are a lot of schools absolutely struggling with this decision, and I'm not going to overstep, but I guess if I was giving my 2 cents, my response would be that certainly athletics is an opt-in, not an opt-out. And the conditioning that's going to take place in December through whenever, and frankly, if we were allowed to do conditioning from December until just January 19th, I would take that as well. Those are going to be socially distanced with masks on, and they're going to be training sessions in small cohorts, and the kids are going to have to opt in, and those sessions will not impact their ability to make a team. Obviously, they would help make the team, but none of that time period will be a tryout for any of those teams. The tryouts will occur when we can start full practices, whenever the committee allows us to do that. The other piece of that that's been discussed is, I do believe our kids are safest in our hands. A lot of kids have reached out to our coaches and have asked, are we going to have basketball? Are we going to have in the fall? Are we going to have football? Because as a fact, if the kids don't play high school sports, they are going to go somewhere else outside the area, outside the county, and bring it back in our schools. That did happen this fall. There are well-documented cases in lacrosse and ice hockey from around the state. And I believe very much in the protocols that we have. So I agree with you too. I'd love my kids to be in class as well, 100%, and on the soccer field or whatever it is. But I do think because we're using small cohorts and it's an opt-in, to me, that's how I would push back to somebody that does see what I agree does look like a contradiction, because I do think there's a little bit of a difference, and we're keeping them in-house. So we're not going to have them travel outside the town. But I also appreciate that comment because we've wrestled with it on the committee level.
Dr. Kraft-Reese, may I follow up?
Yes, please, Mr. Rob.
I support everything that Mr. Shannon said, and from an administrator's point of view, I definitely see where Dr. Eberwine's coming from in terms of the optics of the vote that was taken earlier tonight, and now we have, for lack of a better term, the awkwardness of talking about trying to bring kids back together earlier than coming back to school on the 19th. The one thing I will say, and I'll say it bluntly, is Mr. Shannon, myself, our assistant principal, Mr. Messina, many of our staff members are increasingly worried about our kids. And we're trying to hold things together. We are trying to hold them together. We feel as though that this tightly controlled environment and plan for winter athletics would help us do that and help us at least somehow bridge the gap for some of our students for when they come back to hybrid. January 19th is a ways away in the minds of our students. And we feel as though this plan would help bridge that gap. So that would be my 2 cents to offer up as far as that goes.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other discussion? Okay.
Yep.
Oh,
Barbara, if I may,
yes, Mr.
I
Case.
agree with what Mr. Rob and Mr. Shannon said. And I think by bringing the sports back, at least maybe we'll be able to convince the other people that it's time to bring the kids back to school. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Peters, would you read the motion then, please?
Sure. Be it resolved that the Central Berkshire Regional School Committee approves the winter sports season for Wacona High School to commence on January 4th, 2021, with conditioning beginning on December 14th, 2020, in accordance with updated guidance from MIAA and EEA.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. I think we're all discussed out. Seeing no further discussion. Superintendent Blake Davis, will you take a roll call? But we have to be mindful of the time. We are approaching the 10 o'clock mark where we have to agree that we can finish the meeting. So you take the vote, the roll call, and then we'll do the vote on extending the meeting.
Mr. Alpert?
Yes.
Mr. Bartels? Mr. Bartels?
Yeah, I'm just torn on this. I'm going to vote no.
Mr. Case?
Yes.
Mr. DeFazio?
Yes.
Ms. DiTomaso?
Yes.
Dr. Eberwine?
No.
Mr. Emerson?
Yes.
Dr. Jelinas?
Yes.
Mr. Locatell?
Yes.
Ms. Latazori?
Ellen, you're muted.
Yes.
Ms. Lounsbury,
Based on the timeline given, I'm going to vote no.
Mr. Peters,
Yes.
Mr. Stewart,
Yes.
Mrs. Tucker,
Yes.
Dr. Kraft Reese.
Yes. And now I'd like to make a motion to continue the meeting past 10 o'clock.
Second.
Very good.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I assume there's no real discussion about this, so we need a roll call vote again to continue the meeting.
Mr. Albert,
Yes.
Mr. Bartels,
Yes.
Mr. Case,
Yes.
Mr. DeFazio,
Yes.
Ms. DiTomaso,
Yes.
Dr. Eberwein,
Yes.
Mr. Emerson,
Yes.
Dr. Jelinas,
Yes.
Mr. Luckatell,
Yes.
Ms. Latazori,
Yes.
Ms. Lounsbury,
Yes.
Mr. Peters,
Yes.
Mr. Stewart,
Yes.
Mrs. Tucker,
Yes.
Dr. Kraft Reese.
Yes, thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, Jared, for that. That was very comprehensive, and I really feel safe that the students are being well cared for. So thank you for that, and Mr. Rob. Personnel. Let's see, there's nothing to report there. Old business. I just wanted to remind people that, especially the newcomers, that on December 9th, Dorothy Presser from MASC is offering us a Zoom training. It's from 6 to 9 p.m. and we'll send out information to all of you, but it would be a really good thing for us to attend. For those of us who have been here before, it's a refresher. For those newbies, it's good information. So I suggest that you attend. Is there any other new business? Okay, seeing none. Any remarks for the good of the committee?
I just wanted to mention, Barbara, if I may, that I
Okay.
found it very helpful to get the spreadsheet of the election results. It was very interesting to see how many voters left their ballots blank. Obviously, probably related to COVID, but it also presents an opportunity for us to reach out to the community to reinforce what the school committee represents to the community. It just was very eye-opening to see some of the communities where the blank votes were more prevalent than others. So just wanted to observe that.
Thank you, honey. Mr. Stewart? You're muted.
Yep, thank you. I'm just trying to find that button again.
Okay.
One of the things, certainly, I want to appreciate all the staff, the teachers, Leslie, all the hard work you and your staff is doing. And I just wonder, is there a way that we can make this easier? Is there anything that we can make easier on the teachers? Nicole, you had talked about a cohort C, adding another hybrid model, or another group, if you will. And I just wonder if there's any way of working with this hybrid. It seems to me that, the teachers, maybe I have this wrong, but have to do their lessons for the in-person and also do a second lesson every single day for the asynchronous. But if I have that wrong, let me know. But I just wonder if there's some way that we could combine those, if we have the technology in the classrooms, to basically have half the group home and everybody receive the same lesson through Zoom being projected in the classroom or other means. Not to discuss everything now, I just look to see if there's other ways to make this easier on people, especially the teachers that have to do this. The other thing that I would like to say or really ask is, I'm just curious what the policy is on communications from the school committee. We have a joint communication, Barbara, that you put out. Thank you for doing that. My only question is really that I myself, I don't know if anybody else had received a copy of that or had a chance to have input on that when that was coming from the school district and from the school committee. And also the special meeting that we had, where I don't think any of our members had any advance notice of the meeting or the motions that were being presented. So I'm just curious what the process is for making joint communications or public communications from the school committee and how we can stay better informed.
Okay, I'm not sure I understand the complexity of it, but go ahead, Leslie.
I mean, I can speak to the first one, Mr. Stewart, in terms of teachers.
Okay.
I think that right now they are, I think that the support is just making sure that there's some consistency moving forward. I think that the efforts toward consistency is very supportive. I think the hardest part around planning is when is toggling back and forth between the different models. So being able to have one model consistently over a period of time is probably it is extremely supportive. So I think that to some degree was accomplished tonight. Although I think you're going to see differing feelings in this climate right now. So I think that right now the double planning, any kind of like differentiation around planning more comes when models are changed, not as much when you're in a particular model.
And Mr. Stewart, could I just ask you to elaborate? I'm not clear as to what you're asking in terms of communication from the school committee. What is it that I can do that I'm not doing?
The joint communication that you put out with the boards of health with Dr. Doyle and whatnot, that one caught me off guard. I know that we had discussed more communication routes other than what Leslie and the principals have been putting out, but it seemed to me that it was a communication from the school committee that I don't believe that we had any foreknowledge or input on.
Okay, it came from a Safety and Wellness Committee meeting where Dr. Doyle suggested that it would be a good idea to send out a letter to our families that was joint from the Board of Health and from the school committee, me specifically. So that's the genesis of that communication. And if you felt like I should have perhaps run it by you all first, certainly I can do that in the future.
Thank you. Yeah, I just, as a communication from the school committee, that's all. I think that we should all be informed of that ahead of time or have a chance for input. So that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, it came about where Dr. Doyle said the school committee chairs and the Board of Health. But Nicole, you had something to say to that too.
Yeah, I just want to mention that idea was also mentioned at a full committee meeting.
Yes.
And I think it is in the minutes from our last meeting that we were going to do that.
Right. Yeah, I was at both of those meetings. But so thank you.
Any other comments for the good of the committee? This has been a long meeting and I appreciate everybody's attention. And this is our last meeting before the holidays. So happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, happy holidays to you all. Enjoy your time and be safe.
You as well.
Thank you.
Happy holidays to everyone.
Thank you.
Happy holidays. Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah.
Motion to adjourn.